Sublime Text Fanatics, and welcome to the inaugural episode of whatever it was that I named this stream. Oh, that nerd off the clock? That sounds about right. Yeah, that's the ticket. If you were here in last stream, last Monday, then you'll know why I did that. But essentially, I wanted to cut over to a new way of doing streaming and have all of the new stream descriptions and everything be a little bit better, saying what's actually happening inside of the stream, having a table of contents to be able to skip around inside of it and stuff like that. Seemed a lot easier to do that starting fresh than to try to cast our mind back through 128 distinct things. Hopefully this time audio is actually working. Last week there was a little bit of a snafu related to that. So, if you are new here, hello and welcome. My name is ODATNerd. I have a YouTube channel right here on YouTube. You happen to be watching it right now where I do videos teaching people how to use Sublime Text. I also use Sublime Text in my daily life for absolutely all of my text editing, with the exclusion of some things on remote servers wherein I have to use VI. Apart from that, whether I am coding, just writing notes and to-do lists, or anything of the sort, I'm using Sublime for that sort of thing. Hey, good morning, Cyberlenka. Welcome. Yeah, so there's one thing to keep in mind about this new format is that there's a new playlist, okay? And I researched this. I researched it so much. It still seems like it's a good idea, but replays of the stream will go unlisted as soon as the stream is done. However, if you go to my YouTube page, on my YouTube channel rather, right up at the top, there's a new section for multiple playlists that contain live stuff, and one of those is Off the Clock. And that it's just that having longer form videos on the order of 2 or 3 hours that are just sort of live streams really tank viewership on the channel, because what YouTube's algorithm does is see you interact with something, and then if you stay there long enough, it'll decide, yeah, you watched 30% of that, you probably want to see more of that, I'll show you more videos like that. And in order to watch 30% of a 3-hour video, you really got to hang around for a while. So you click away right away, YouTube decides you don't like my stuff, and then nobody ever knows that I'm actually doing anything. So we have to keep that on the DL, such as it is. But despite that, they are readily findable, hopefully. Now, what we were working on last week is what we're going to continue working on this week, which is someone in my Discord asked, and they're not the first one, how to create a snippet that can insert the current date in. And we showed off a Stack Overflow answer that I wrote about this a couple of years ago, which basically involves the idea that you use a snippet that has a field that will represent the date, but you have to arrange things such that when you trigger the snippet, you use a macro so that it triggers the snippet and then immediately inserts the date using a third-party plugin, or you use a key binding to trigger, or a command palette entry to trigger a custom command that will inject. Now in Sublime Text 4, we have access to the chain command built in. That's something that you used to only be able to do with the chain of command or multi-command packages. Those are the sorts of things that could allow you to invoke a snippet and then immediately insert a date as well. But all of those situations require you to create snippets and use them in a way that is perhaps breaking of flow. It's the whole situation that we have here, right? So we came up with a way to do that, and in thinking about it, I think we can make this a little bit cooler and do more stuff. So let's get right into it, and we can take a look at what we're talking about here. So the example is this. Someone wants to create a new LaTeX document, and they want to have the current date inserted into this little header at the top. And you can imagine you might want something like this for all sorts of situations and not necessarily in LaTeX. For example, if I had a C file and I was firing up a test program, perhaps I want to have a little header that has the date that this thing was actually created crammed up in the top. Or if I was creating a new header file, I might want something similar and along those lines. So this is handy, I think, to have. Now, this won't work in just a native Sublime Text snippet, with no extra code or anything. Sublime knows about numbered fields from 0 up to whatever. It starts at 1, goes to 2, then to 3, then to 4, etc. until it runs out of those, and then it skips over to 0. It knows about a variety of other variables, such as the name of the current user, the name of the current file, things like that. What it doesn't have is something dynamic like date. So if we tried to expand this as a snippet, it wouldn't actually work. But what we came up with last stream was something where we could say, invoke the snippet for document. This is what would happen, this one right here, if we triggered this using standard expansions. And what we end up with is a title and an author, but the date array is empty there. As you can see, it's going to skip right over it because we wanted that to be the date. That's the snippet that contains it. But if you watch the video on snippets here on the channel, you'll know that anything that looks like a variable is expanded at the point where the thing is inserted in, and then it skips through fields. And since it automatically treats any variables that don't exist as the empty string, this isn't something that it knows about, so it just assumes that there's nothing to put in there, and you end up with an empty date. But what we came up with in the last stream is this dynamic system where not only do we get that snippet, but we get this one that has been dynamically added into here. And when we trigger that one, we get a date in that position. This needs to be enhanced a fair bit because you probably want to be able to control the format of that date. This is just a proof of concept kind of situation. Now, the nice thing about this, again, is that this is inherently using snippets in a more native sense. You know, there are a couple of problems with this. One is that if we look at all of the snippets in the command palette like this, Sublime behind the scenes, because it's the thing that loads all of the snippets, inherently knows about all of them and in what cases they can be used. And if we were to look through here, we would eventually find one named document, one would imagine. We may need to add a little bit of a whatever it was actually called, or maybe not. That's intriguing. Why does that not show up? Oh, because it's called the one from the snippet because of that. Pardon me. So because of that, that one pops up in here, and we can expand it, but it's not gonna put the date in there. And our other one, the one that we get by using the functionality in this package, this one here, isn't going to automatically appear in the command palette. So that's a little something we're going to have to deal with. If we want that, we're going to have to be a little bit more dynamic about things. I threw up a quick question in the Sublime Discord that said, when it comes to expanding snippets like this, is there something that you think would be handy? And someone said the clipboard. So indeed, yeah, that could actually be sort of an interesting little bit of something that we stick in here. We need to enhance this a fair bit. But that's something that we can do. There's also another thing in my scraps repository, which I believe I have also done a video on, but I can't remember, which enhances the selection field. And maybe we could do a little something with that in here as well, as relates to inserting text from the clipboard, but one step at a time. So what we've got here is this rough to-do list of things that we should probably do or want to consider doing to try to make this some sort of full-fledged package. And this started off just as a simple one-off potential idea for something that someone might find interesting, but and it was going to be just a scrap, but maybe this is actually something that's interesting enough that we actually put this on package control or something. I don't know. We'll see. It might just be something that you can unofficially add if this is the sort of feature that you want. We'll see how it all goes. So as a quick overview of how this code actually works, what we're what we're doing here is there's a command that we created called date snippet refresh cache. Got to change that name if we're going to do more than just dates with this, right? But it was conceived to be something else before it turned into this. That particular command is this one right here, which, as you can see, clears this snippet list completely and then refreshes it with a new one. And every time that happens, it displays something into the console so you can actually see it happening. And there it is right there. As this plugin loaded, it refreshed the snippet cache, which is why everything works. And what does this thing actually do when we look at it? It finds all of the snippet files, and then for each one, it examines it to see if it's got something special in it that we might want to do something with, is essentially the case. So since this is generically right now looking for dates, what this is actually doing is for each snippet loading the snippet resource, parsing it into XML, because this is an XML file, and then pulling out the tab trigger, potential description, the content of the thing, and the scope that it applies in. That's the content right there. There's the tab trigger, there's the description, there's the scope. All of this stuff is optional. That one, not so much. If you don't put content in your snippet, it doesn't really matter what you put in any of these other ones, because it's not going to expand into anything anyway, right? Kind of the situation. What we do here right now is say, if any of these snippets generically say that they want to do something with a date, or don't say, rather, then we don't care about this. Otherwise, we stash this into a list of snippets for which we want to perform some sort of extra processing. We're storing those into this object using the scope that the snippet is supposed to expand out into as a key. And what that's going to do is group up all of the snippets for Python into one array, and all of the things for HTML into one array, and so on down the line, including more complex scope selectors. And what that's going to do for us is allow us to make sure that we only offer snippets into the appropriate context, right? Keep in mind that all of the handling of snippets is done completely by the core. Sublime loads this, it knows about tab triggers, and immediately knows to add those into the auto-completion system. If you include a description, it knows to use that in the command palette when it automatically adds entries, even if you don't do anything special about it yourself. And if you specify a scope, it makes sure that the snippet is only offered in the command palette in a place where it is supposed to exist, and it only will expand out or be added into the autocomplete panel in a place where it exists. So we need to replicate all of that functionality internally in order to be able to expand this snippet out, which is why we need to snap that data up. Now here is the magic of this whole thing, and I mentioned this in the tweet that I sent out last night about how the stream was definitely going to be on, despite the fact that there's a heat warning in effect in my local area. We have enough AC to keep things on an even keel, if you will. In Sublime Text 3, what you could do is create completions that are just basically this piece of text expands out into this piece of text, following the exact same rules as snippets and Sublime completions files would have otherwise followed, or just this trigger inserts this text, and that's it. We have more powers to do something with this in Sublime Text 4. The auto-completion system is a lot more powerful than it was in Sublime Text 3. And that allows us to do a few things, and one of those is to provide a completion which, when it triggers, executes a command instead of doing something else. So the magic of our completions triggering via a auto-completion panel is we're creating a completion item that says when the trigger text from the snippet is triggered, I want you, for this particular thing, please invoke the command insert snippet, which is an internal command, and into that please provide the contents of the snippet as the content of the actual file that we just loaded. And also there's a special variable called date, and when it expands, it should have this value. We can put any number of these things in here. Now this is something that has been possible for a while, and I believe one of the solutions that were in the Stack Overflow question that I talked about were putting that in and just binding a key that triggers insert snippet with a date in some particular fashion or something. One of the things we could possibly do. We're also have the ability to add an annotation and some details, and we can provide some kind information, and all of that stuff is visible right in here. This is the kind information, which allows us to say that this is a snippet with date, as opposed to this one, which is just a snippet. That's why this one's blue and this one's green, to make sure that you can tell the difference. We also added this with date to the description of the snippet so that you can tell this is the basic one and this is the enhanced one. And this information down here at the bottom, this is the details. One of the things we have on our list is to control whether or not that actually appears. Because since one thing wants details, everything wants details, so it's just spitting out that this is a snippet, but not providing any sort of other information. And then expanding that out, when you trigger that, actually executes the command. So here's a few things we want to do. First of all, because we are manually loading and parsing all of the snippets ourselves, we need to be aware of the fact that when snippets change, we need to know about it because we're loading them ourselves. Normally that's something that Sublime takes care of behind the scenes. We have a little bit of code related to that here in this event handler, which says anytime a file is saved, if it happens to be a Sublime snippet file, then we want to refresh the snippet cache. Now this is incredibly ham-handed. Incredibly. I can't even talk about how ham-handed that is. You don't need to scan for and reload every snippet just because one changed. Also, that should only do something. This should be rooted in the packages folder. We should probably tweak that too, because it doesn't matter if you save any Sublime snippet, it just needs to be something that's in packages, otherwise it's never going to be seen. There are other times when snippets may be made available or maybe go away, and one of those is when a new package is installed, then we need to look inside of it to see if any snippets have been seen in there, and if so, load them. Or if a package is ignored, Sublime is going to unload all those snippets. We also need to unload all of those snippets. So the first item in our to-do list here is check settings for when the ignored packages setting changes and use that to know if we need to do something special. These things in this list, by the way, are in no particular order. We're going to tackle all of them, but some of them are more complicated than others, so we're going to pick the low-hanging fruit first. The next one is this, a setting to control whether the details appear at the bottom or whether we add a description. And again, that is this stuff here. We're going to add a setting that says, should I do something with details? Yes, no. If you say yes, we're going to include this so that you can see this. If we're going to say, if it says no, then we're not going to insert that in there. Is the idea. There's still going to be kind information here, so even if something else is adding it, it'll still say snippet with date. We got to change that too, because we're going to change some stuff about how that works. Configurable date formats per snippet. That's a little something that we need to handle. Right now, this is basically using the simplest possible format. We're presuming that this is going to have some other something in here. Like that says this is a date formatted this way or something. You know, maybe you want to have a different thing. So we're going to need to do a little something with that to be able to make sure that for a date snippet, we can actually specify the format, and then there'll be a default format if nothing is actually in there. Include the ability to insert the clipboard. That is something that I mentioned. I asked in the Sublime Text Discord, what do you think would like to be in here? And Ashwin, I believe, said someone had a issue in the tracker about wanting a snippet to put the current clipboard text into a field. So let's work that out as well. We also have a command for inserting our snippets. Now, the magic of this is that we are using in our code the internal insert snippet command, which what it does is it allows you to trigger a snippet right away using either string content that you give it or by looking into the name of a snippet file and doing something with it. Do with it the snippet, do the snippet with it, etc. And then any other arguments you pass here are the variables that get expanded out. We want to have a command similar to this, like insert enhanced snippet, that works the exact same way. So what we would do there is mimic the same arguments that this thing takes, except you wouldn't have to specify date, and doing insert enhanced snippet and using date would be enough for it to work, because this should be an implementation detail. This isn't something that you should be worried about yourself. So that's something else we want to add to this. And lastly, do we want to, this is an open question, dynamically generate Sublime command files to make snippets appear in the command palette in situations in which they apply? This is sort of tied to this, because we can make this command actually only apply if the snippet that you're telling it to expand would work in a particular scope. And ironically or not, those are actually all things that we have examples of. Apart from all of that, though, the very first thing that we need to do something with is, well, realistically change the name of the package, but one step at a time, right? I should also point out that this is currently being tracked by Git, and it will be on GitHub. It's not there yet. I haven't set up a repository on GitHub to track this, because I wanted to make sure that we had a good starting base. And by that, I mean one of the things we did in here was add in key bindings files and commands file and the settings file. I wanted to make sure we actually wanted those things in here and had something decent to put in them before I push it up. There's one rule about Git: push makes permanent. So this gives us the ability to rewrite history, and no one but you fine individuals that watch these streams will know what was actually happening there. The very first thing that I want to do, though, is refactor a little bit how this thing is actually working. And the reason for that is, if we want this to do more than just dates, if we want this to do dates and the clipboard, for example, that's not just one thing, that's two things. And that means that immediately, if there's two, there could be more than two. There could be many things that someone might want to inject into here. An environment variable, for example. We might want to specify one of these things that knows how to inject in an environment variable based on a field that someone has provided. So we need to abstract away parts of this code into some sort of helper class. So what we're going to do is create a base helper class that knows how to check to see if the snippet that you give it applies to it or not, and something which can be used to actually do something with the result. That way, instead of having this here being hard-coded to this thing will automatically bind the appropriate arguments that it needs as it's working. And I'm not 100% sure what the full shape of that is going to be. So that is the first thing that we're going to ponder out here and see how exactly we can pull that off. So what this is going to be is a whole bunch of refactoring and putting stuff in here with the ultimate aim of first breaking this and then bringing it back around so that it actually still works the way that it does right now, but in a nicer way than what currently exists. That is the ultimate plan for this stuff. I don't have a to-do item for that because it's just something that just sort of applies here. All of that description out of the way, we should also point out that if you're watching, if you have any questions about Sublime Text at all, even if it's not related to what we're doing here, throw those into the chat. Questions are always welcome. Derailing what we're currently talking about or doing to answer a question is fantastically fun and awesome, and sometimes distracts us away from potentially not knowing what we have to do to get something to work. So that is a large part of the reason of why we're live, and also to work on these packages and provide a little bit of information about that sort of thing. Of course, if you have questions about how to create packages in Sublime Text, this is a fantastic place to ask that sort of thing as well. Now let's think a little bit about how we actually want this to work. We're gonna need a class for this, so let's go and throw one down here. And we're gonna have several classes. Ultimately, this should be separated out. We wouldn't create one plugin that is one gigantic file. It's very hard to maintain a code base like that. You're constantly scooting around trying to find the right thing, even with the appropriate navigation, and it just seems a little messy. But one of the tenets of software development a la ODAT nerd is make it work and then make it pretty. And there's a lot of extra knock-on complications, if you will, to creating a package that contains multiple plugin files, because you have to synchronize their loading to make sure that everything reloads all at once. Otherwise, things get all out of hand, and that's not a complication we need while we're in the middle of trying to figure out how something actually works, right? So we need a class that is going to be the base class. We'll call this, maybe we'll call it EnhancedSnippetBase, like so. Now, a couple of things that we're going to need out of this are what? And also, how is this actually going to work? Let's say that one thing we want is a class method, and the class method is maybe named is applicable, and it's going to get the class, and it's going to get, what do we actually want to call this? Let's say it gets the trigger, it gets the, I can't remember all of the parts that we had there. The trigger, the description doesn't matter. Just the trigger and the content, let's say, for right now. We're going to say by default, it doesn't do anything. So what we're going to have ultimately is a list of the classes that somehow know how to enhance a snippet. And whenever we load one, for each one of them, we're going to trigger its isApplicable method to say, hey, class that does something fancy with a snippet, is this a snippet that applies to you? And it can say yes, or it can say no. An example of this would be if there was an EnhancedSnippetBase subclass that knew how to expand dates, then we would say, hey, do you care about this snippet? And it could look and say, I don't see any dates in here, so no, I don't care. Or yes, I do care. Right? And then it knows that we actually need to do something with this thing. Something else that we're going to need here, and Do we actually want to create an instance of this class, or is this all going to be class methods? That is something we're going to see as we work through this, because I have an idea for how this works, but I don't necessarily know. So what you're getting here is a real live experience for how creating packages for something like this might actually work. It may seem like a daunting task what we're trying to do here, but we're just going to sort of piecemeal it out and see what fits and spitball things. That's perfectly fine. Not everybody just sits down and types for 20 minutes and they have perfect code. In fact, probably nobody does. So let's say that we thought this thing was actually applicable. What might we actually return from this thing? Is an intriguing question. One thing I guess we're going to want is variables. Let's say that just defaults to an empty dictionary. So in the case of the date class, what this would return is this date should do something special. I think that also means that this should get the content, because we don't want this to necessarily return all of the variables. We only want it to return some of the variables, and what it's actually going to return is well, you know what, why don't we document what we think how all of this stuff is going to work. Whoops. So we're going to say this is the base class for creating a new, let's call it enhanced snippet, since that's what I called this, the actual class. This is the base class for creating a new enhanced snippet expansion. As snippets are loaded or reloaded. Well, we're saying that this class, well, let's say subclasses of this class are used to see if the content of a snippet needs any extra expansions, and if so, what they are. It's kind of the situation that we have there. All right. So this, are we allowed to put that sort of thing in there? I'm not entirely sure. Can you document the class method that way? Well, let's take a look. I assume so. That's not going to provide any sort of useful information, is it? I'm not entirely sure if it's actually something we want to do. Oh, sorry. We want Python documenting functions with decorators. Yeah, I'm aware of what it does. I want to know if one might actually do something fantastically cool with it. It happens inside. Alright, well that's weird. I guess I probably inherently knew that but didn't want to actually do it. We don't actually care about the trigger here either, do we? The specialness of a snippet is entirely related to the content of it and not the text that's used to trigger it, one presumes. We can always enhance that later if we need. Easier to add functionality than it is when you decide you need it, then just strip it away if you decide that you've made a terrible mistake in adding it in the first place. Return a Boolean indication of whether or not a little something like that, yeah. The base class implementation assumes no variables are needed. Okay, and this one is when kind of pondering if we should kind of rewrite the actual snippet content in this thing or not, which might be something that we want. Again, we'll take a look and see if that's actually something that's interesting to us when the time comes. Given a parsed snippet body, return back a dictionary where the keys are. Hey, Stephen Lien, thank you so much for becoming a member of the channel. Welcome, welcome. First person to do that live. Whoa. Hang on a second. I got a thing for this. Welcome, welcome. For those that don't know, I haven't really talked about it at all anywhere, but I set up channel memberships on the channel. There's 3 different levels that you can join at, where you can show your support for the channel if you'd like. I haven't said anything about it officially because I'm waiting for gifting on the channel to be a thing so that I can blast out a bunch of gifts as a way of saying thank you to the fine audience that watches my videos here on YouTube, because you guys are absolutely awesome. And Stephen Lien is currently in rarefied air. So let's see. Given a part, given a parse snippet body, return back a dictionary where the keys are the variables that need to be expanded, and the values are the text that will be inserted. This will only get invoked if it is applicable, says that this class supports this. A little bit something like that is the idea that we have going on here. Now, the thing that I'm thinking of here, and again, I think this is something that we kind of work as we go, is we could say class insert date snippet, and that is something that is based on EnhancedSnippetBase. Just so that we know. These are a couple of things that we're going to be interested in, like so, right? Whoops. And the first one is, how is our code up here determining that this is something that actually applies? And it's knowing if the content contains the string date. Which this needs to be made so much smarter, but that's why we're doing this part first. So we would do something like this. to apply, in order for us to apply to how do we even formulate this particular comment in order for us to that's one thing. And here, the variables that we are returning back are that. Like so, yeah? So taken together, except for the part where I saved the file while it was still broken, everything's all cool here. And again, we're going to document this. This may not actually be necessary, but while the ideas for what we're doing here are in flux, I find it handy to keep comments in here that help remind me of why I thought a thing should work a certain way or do a certain thing or etc. So that if we decide we don't want that, I can remember why. Because sometimes you have an idea and then when it comes time to actually do something with it, you can't remember what it actually was. Whoops. Okay, so the only variable that we support is a date, which inserts the current date into the snippet. Hello, welcome. How are you doing? Welcome to our very first ODAT Nerd Off the Clock, the live stream where you get an insight into the sort of nerdery that I would just be doing even if I wasn't live. But you get the benefit of saying hi, hanging out, watching, maybe learning something, maybe getting to laugh at me for being a big old Dorcas idiot about something. Life is cool. Now, if we're going to have a class that does something like this, this snippet enhancement class provides the ability to do something. What's the something that it does? Expand out variables into the current date and time. It's kind of a situation. If we're going to have that, then we're going to need to have a list of these things so that we can actually apply them, right? And if we're going to do that, I think that means we're going to need a little bit of extra juice here. This is where I'm already unhappy about the order that we've put this stuff into. So let's say that this actually happens here. Awesome to hear that. Hope everybody's having a fantastic Monday, such as it is. Mine was not too bad. A lot of meetings, but I got to do a bunch of planning things, so that's always cool. It's actually technically engaging and fun to try to solve problems. It's kind of the whole reason I became a software developer in the first place. The only downside to today is that we are on day one of like 5 or 6 of a heat wave. So my little canine friend who's currently zonked out under the desk is really hankering for a lot of showers. Helps him stay cool. Even though technically speaking we have AC, which is helping quite a bit to keep things into a more livable state of affairs, if you will. Let's do this. A list of all of the known classes that can potentially offer, oops, enhanced snippet expansion variables. Yeah, it's whack. Are you in the same general area of me as well? I know the UK has been getting it ridiculously. Last year, over summer, our temperatures here got to dang near 40 degrees Celsius. We did not have any air conditioning, so we were living in misery with fans and all of the lights being off, doing absolutely anything we could to cut down all heat buildup. It was awful. And, you know, basically it was one of those situations where it just suddenly went like heat wave, and if you didn't already have an AC, you were boned because there was a rush on them, and, you know, prices went up and et cetera, et cetera. So after that, this year, very early in the year, my wife hooked us up with a couple of ACs well ahead of time, because it's nice to have it and not need it than need it and not have it. And today was the first day that we set up the second one. We've had one in the living room for a while because it's gotten quite warm, but today it's so warm that we're like, you know what, we're gonna have to actually bite the bullet and put the one into the bedroom so that it's possible to sleep at night. Whoops. But I know the UK has awful. I think the UK has the heat wave that we had last year. This is like nothing by comparison, but still, you know, plenty warm for somebody that sits in the confluence of computer, and two more computers on the desk, just sort of ringed by heat as these things go. That should work, I would imagine. And what we're going to do down here is print. Actually, I guess, I cannot type. We could have actually had that just fine anyway. Yeah, let's put that back at the bottom because I don't like it being at the top. I didn't really think that all the way through. If we have the value there, and we know that by the time it gets all the way down here, that's there, and if each one of these things inserts itself in as it's loading, then we still end up with something that we want. This is not how we would actually want to do this. What would actually happen in this particular case is we'd have a separate folder in here that was the enhancements, and then we would be able to import that list directly from there and not have to calculate it this way. But we'd have to make sure that everything is set up appropriately before we can actually do that. So if that is the case for something that we have, then when it comes to getting snippet completions, what we need is a way to gather a list of classes here that are going to apply to this thing. And if none of them apply, then we don't care. So let's make a function for that. Let's say we'll call this get and what that's gonna need is the tab trigger in this particular case. As for the way that we're going to factor this particular code out, we're going to do that and the content, right? I believe that was the magic of that variable there. That one there, yeah. We want something like that. We want to say if trigger equals empty. We may not need this later, but we're going to have it here for right now. We're going to say all right, that's the magic of that. So what we're going to say here is, for this particular version, we're going to do that. And then we need to iterate over the list of these things for enhancer in snippet extensions, for example. We're going to do a little thing here. Ah, South America. Yeah, yeah. Definitely used to that sort of thing there, I would imagine. The shocking thing about this heat for us here is that we have had a ridiculously cold spring and the first parts of summer. It's only the second time it's actually gotten quite warm. Even as far back as like a month ago, we were having temperatures where the high was like 12 degrees. I mean, I love that. I prefer the cool to the heat because you can always add a layer, but you can't take it off. So heat's just extra stifling and harder to, well, harder for me to deal with anyway. We need something like this. Classes is going to be equal to a list. Actually, you know what? Let's do this. Let's say if it's not equal to, then do this, because then it'll be a little bit nicer to look at. What did I actually call that? Call that thing? That is applicable. I should have known that. If the enhancer is applicable to this content, then classes dot append enhancer and return classes. So we'll say here, given the tab trigger for a snippet and its contents, return back a list of all of the known enhancement classes that apply to this particular snippet. This can be an empty list if none apply. Okay. Now, right now, what we're going to do here is include this, because our mechanism for this is that we only support expansions via the autocomplete panel. And if that's the case, the only things that are ever going to show up in the auto-completion panel are things that have a tab trigger defined. So if there's no tab trigger, we don't have to do anything because the snippet's never going to be applicable anyway. However, one of the things we're going to plan to do in the future is come up with our own version of the insert snippet. We'll call it insert enhanced snippet. That can just be invoked and apply at any point. So at that point, we do need to care even if there's not a trigger. The good news is that based on the way that we applied this, we're going to call this thing down here. All we have to do is not pass trigger and not test trigger, and it'll just work the same either way. Or we can, provide an extra argument to say whether we need a trigger or not. Those sorts of enhancements are pretty easy to pull off. So we go something like that. So get the list of potential enhancements that we can make to this. We'll call this enhancers, yeah, equals get completion classes given that trigger. Oh, actually, I guess that was a slightly, well, you know what? There's an optimization there. Let's do the same thing here. We can only work with, yikes. We can only work with snippets that have a tab trigger, since we only support AC type snippets. Cannot type this evening. There's no need to waste time checking if there's no body of the snippet to enhance, right? That's not how you spell enhance, though. Hey, hello! If you want to use that, first of all, hey Red, hello. I noticed my phone told me you were going live at like the instant I fired up the stream. I was like, but I kind of knew that that's probably how that was going to happen. Hope you had a good stream playing around. And Tech Ignition, the drop game does totally work, but in order to trigger it, you have to go to my Twitch chat and trigger it there, and then it'll display here, because I don't have a YouTube bot that listens for that particular command. So yeah, I think we want that instead. Now we're gonna say that get the list of potential enhancements we can make to this snippet. If there are not any, then we can just leave. Yeah. I'm doing well, I gotta say. Hopefully the noise of the fan isn't blowing across the mic and causing any sort of audio issues. But I have it going on a low enough thing that I'm still getting some air blowing, and it's actually quite nice in here. And I had a pretty good day. I mean, it could have been better. It was more or less one nonstop meeting. However, that one nonstop meeting was basically planning and decision making for what we're doing, which actually is kind of a fun thing. I got to write up an explicit document that says how our branching strategy in the new project is going to work, and that's awesome to hear. I had a little bit of a misfire last stream where for the first like 7 or 8 minutes there was no audio because one of the aspects of it crapped out and one of the meters was going, but it wasn't making it all the way to OBS. It was awful. I think I fixed that though. The other thing, this really excited me, is I mentioned my idea of this is related to the fact, by the way. I don't know if you follow me on Twitch, you probably already have this news. If not, then you don't. But my manager was talking to me on Friday about pushing hard to get me a promotion to a senior. I can't remember the exact term that he said. Basically, senior tech, not just senior developer, because I'm going to be guiding a lot more of the project than just doing code and such. I don't know if that is just a change in title and status, or if it is also going to be commensurate with some extra amount of moolah. I do know that bonuses were given out, and based on what people said, either I have very low expectations or I got a larger bonus than other people. I never, discussed that sort of thing one way or the other, but it was just sort of an aside. I wouldn't even have mentioned it until one of my coworkers was like, eh. So we'll see about that. But as a part of that, I was told that, or rather I said, so if I'm the tech lead, do I get to enforce my evil whims as regards commit messages in the repository? And my manager was like, oh, what do you mean? And I'm like, well, I think we should adopt the 50/70 rule, because I'm the only one that's doing it right now. And if I had my druthers, I would make everybody use it, because then I wouldn't have a bunch of commits in the repository that glare red at me because someone's not following it. And so I explained the idea that the first, if you're unfamiliar with this as a scheme, I think we probably all are for developers, but the idea is that the very first line of a commit message can be no more than 50 characters long. Then there's going to be a blank line, and then all other lines that come are no more than 72 characters. I say 50/70, it's really 50/72. The idea behind that is if you do git log one line, it's always going to pull the first one. So if you use a nice short name, everything's going to look nice in the output. And if you're just looking at things inside the console, having this be formatted specifically and not one gigantic thing that just word wraps because of your editor makes things look nicer in the terminal. And he said, yeah, sure, we can totally do that. And then I said, also, we would definitely put Jira stories at the very first word in the commit message. And this is just me, and I've talked about this on streams before. Just because there's a story number here that says what this change is actually about, it's not as helpful as it could be because Jira is slow. And if you're tracing through stuff in the repository to see what happened, you don't want to look at a commit and then go look in Jira and find the ticket and see what that commit was about, and then come back and then find another commit and then go. So I always, and if you've watched any number of streams of mine, you'll know this is the case, put messages in here that explain. It doesn't have to be a lot, just a couple of sentences, what changed and what the rationale for that change was, because it helps you put into perspective what this thing is actually supposed to mean, particularly if you're not like me and don't just throw comments all over God's creation. And after I finished explaining that, he was like, yes, I highly like this idea. And I'm like, excellent. So that's going to be a thing, and now I get to work up some commit hooks to be able to enforce our evil whims and desires. It's exciting. So while I was in a lot of meetings, this sort of planning for stuff, the deciding even something as simple as the merge strategy, what the commit messages are going to look like, what our file structure is going to look like in the repository, roughly what the outline of the code is going to be. We can't go too far down the line on that until we're sure what it is we're actually trying to do. That's just fun. Okay, that takes care of the code that used to be there. And then this also needs to change a bit. So we need to gather the list of variables here as well. Yeah, it's cool. I mean, and I've mentioned this to my my manager before. Because there was stuff about the previous iteration of the project that I didn't like, purely from the perspective of it doesn't look nice as code, and I can see right now that if we proceed down this avenue, we're going to be in maintenance hell. This is going to be so hard to maintain. There's duplication of code. There's 3 different files doing something almost but not quite the same in 3 different ways. This needs to be factored. This needs to be better. It's just a little too much. And he was like, maybe we just leave that until later. And then after like a month of doing stuff, he's like, you know what? Maybe we do that now. And I'm like, I'm in. All right, so you tell me when I need to stop, because given my druthers, I will just refactor this code to hell and back for 7 months. I will just constantly find little little bits and corners that I can tweak this and fiddle that to make this look cooler. That clearly is not something that we can actually pull off here, you know. We probably want to stop at some point. So let's prioritize what we definitely want in here. And it's fun. I don't know. I'm a nerd. That's why I have this nickname. Essentially, is what the deal with that is. I mean, the code that I have been working on for the past 20 years that's pretty much all we've done, right? I've mentioned in stream. It was for the lion's share of 21 years. There was just 2 of us, me and one other guy, responsible for designing the system, implementing it, supporting it, maintaining it, refactoring it. The only outside pokes that we got were things from vendors saying our file is changing to this, or someone in the company saying we have a new vendor, or we want to process a new file from this vendor, it looks like this, or something along those lines. Apart from that, complete carte blanche to do whatever we want. And that was literally it. Someone would come to us and say, we need to process the NASDAQ feed, and we would say, fantastic. What parts of it do you actually need? All right, you want the mutual fund stuff? We'll get you the mutual fund stuff. And then those people just wandered away, and we did our thing and came up with the code. And if we weren't doing that, we had blessings from the we had yeah, I know, right? We had blessings from the management to, as long as nobody's asking any questions and there's no support burden and you're not working on anything else, you just do your thing, man. So we would spend some time, you know, driving RC cars around, playing LAN games in the office. But we would just spend a lot of time being like, you know what? This interprocess communication system that we came up with is nice, but it's got this weird edge case. Let's just rewrite that bad boy. We'll just rewrite it from scratch and just like fork a branch and completely rework from the ground up the entire IPC mechanism. Or you're like, you know what? This configuration format that we're using is butt. When there's a problem, we can't tell where it is, only that it's broken. That's not useful. I'm going to come up with our own configuration file format parser. And while I'm at it, I'm going to put that in a library, and then we can use it everywhere, and we'll make it automatically dynamic. We can create events that'll make sure that whenever the file changes on disk, all of that heavy lifting of knowing and reparsing it and knowing what's changed and everything, we'll just add that in. So over the 20 years, we've just been wrenching on it and cleaning it up and adding dev tools, and you know, that might have groomed me for really wanting to be a refactorer, which is, you know, kind of what we're doing right now. And what we've got here is we now have a list of classes that we know are going to apply completions to this thing, right? One of the things I love about Python is this whole idea that arrays are falsy if they're empty, if you use them in ifs like this. So, hey, given this trigger and this content, what enhancement classes are actually going to contribute something to this? What, nothing? All right, I'm out. Otherwise, something. We need to come up with a variables list. And our snippet vars is going to be something. Now this is, can we do a comprehension on this? I don't know. What we want to do is iterate over all of the enhancements and append them in here. Seems like a thing we could do that way, but let's make it work and then make it pretty. So a little something like that. World's longest variables, because then you look at this and you actually know what it's doing. Snippet vars dot extend enhancement dot that class thing that I can't remember what it's called. variables, and we give it the content. Yeah. Doesn't have an extend, huh? What's it called if not extend? Are we just union them together? Update. Oh, I always get that backwards. I consider it a bit of an orthogonality fail that it's extend for a list but update for a dictionary. I think they should both be the same. So if we clear the console. Alright, that may not necessarily be doing fully what we want because there's not that many snippets that this actually applies to. But one step at a time, yeah? Is that a thing that we can actually do? Probably not, huh? Because we need to... Oh, does that actually... returns none. But that's an unfortunate state of events. All right, well, here. Let's just do that then, huh? Maybe we actually change the name of it in that case. Oh, thanks. I think there is a... The bot may or may not eventually respond to that. We'll find out. There we go. It's a font called Yoshevka. First link will take you to the page for the actual font. The second one is just a download link to the version of it that I'm using because mine is slightly modified, which may or may not actually be necessary. I've been using my modified version for a while. I made it just slightly wider than the default. It was a little bit too skinny for me. You might like it skinnier, you might like it fatter. And they might have changed the default weight because I think the last time I looked, it seemed like it was a little bit better. I'll type in the editor instead of there. Snippet args. Well, actually, if we're going to do that, I think we probably want, well, something like that, yeah? And we may want to actually change how this works. So, passed to the snippet command when the completion invokes. Alright, so now we're getting a little bit of that stuff, which means that in theory, if we hadn't broken something horribly, that would actually work. Alright, so that's working at least. The company Palantir? No, but it makes me want to read The Lord of the Rings again. Oops. What does it do? Yeah. I don't know if my nerdiness is making that be the thing that gets pulled to the front of my mind. I'm guessing something to do with communications based on that name. Okay, how did we bone this up? Because whatever we're doing, the right stuff isn't in putting itself in there. We know that part's probably correct. Let's do this. Whoops. Wow, that totally doesn't help. All right, one of our tests is busted. I would not be surprised if that was a thing that I did at some point. I'm always looking for fancier stuff to do in the stream here. All right. Let's trace this and see where we are going wrong. We're calling this. We're clearing the list. We're telling it to put things into this list. It's finding all of the snippets for each one. It's calling get snippet completion. Get snippet completion should either return or add the item in. So that part's okay. Get completion classes is going to take the trigger and it's going to take the content of this thing and it's going to do something with it. So let's take a look at what it is actually doing. It starts with an empty list of classes. If the empty string isn't in trigger and content, it's going to do that. We'll just make that an appropriate test because we inverted how it actually works. Oh, we build software that empowers organizations to effectively integrate their data, decisions, and operations. I love a site that is just full-on marketing. The farther that you can read on a company's website without getting any indication whatsoever about what the hell it is they actually do, the more I love it. Especially when it's like a library. We help you, synergize your core strategies. Awesome. What the hell does that actually mean? Hey, look, now it's only finding a single snippet that is going to invoke in latex, and the completion item is this. That's the content. That's the name of the variable, and the argument for it being expanded is that, which means it's back, baby. Womp, and there it goes. Cool. We're going to change this just slightly as a result of how we did that. Let's say we don't need that in there because we know that that's working. We don't need that in there because we know that that part's working. And when it comes to this, we'll add enhanced to that, and we'll just call this enhanced snippet instead of that, because it's not necessarily just date that it's going to do. It's going to be potentially any number of things. So there, that's a snippet with we need to fiddle the wait, how did that happen? Right. I think we would do something like that. That's probably going to be a little bit cooler. So now that is the one from the snippet. It's enhanced. That's a snippet enhanced snippet. That's a little more information than one technically requires, I suppose. we could actually make that a little bit cooler and smarter with what it's actually doing. But in any case, it injects, and there's that. Now that we've laid the foundation work for this, this is why we went to all that trouble. We copy this. We know that part works, so we don't care about it, and we just do that. And then we realize we did something stupid, and we do that. We'll call this one the insert clipboard snippet into the current that contain the current clipboard text. Yeah. And for that to work, we'll call this clipboard we want that to be bang bang. Oh, why? Clipboard and reflow that. Clipboard contents. How close am I to that being right? Exactly correct. Wapa. Oh, that's deprecated. Use get clipboard async when possible. Calls callback with the contents of the clipboard size limit, blah, 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 blah. If the clipboard is larger than the size limit, an empty string will be passed. Yeah. You know what? We're gonna... I'm going to ignore that because it's going to make it a little bit more complicated to asynchronously get these things back just because we did that. Something we can do, nothing we need to do right now. But now that that is in place, something we can actually do here is say that this is the clipboard. Now, if I had some lorem text and this was copied, because we made this say that the body of the thing should have the clipboard contents by default instead of that text, I think that means that when you expand this, it doesn't quite work the way that we want it to. That's interesting. All of the ones that I've ever interviewed at did, or ran interviews at. That's a very tiny list, though. The snippet, yes. Why did that not work? Did I spell something wrong? Is there an issue with the code? Oh, because I added the same thing twice, like a dork. Pardon me. Okay, we got to do... we copy that text. This snippet says that the clipboard should be the body. We go here, we type doc, and that one... getting closer. What the hell did I do wrong there? Huh. It works for the one and not the other. That's intriguing. It probably should be async so we can gather all of this stuff. Oh, did I not actually copy that? No, that's definitely that text. Why is it only doing that? That's weird. When in doubt, do that. That looks right. Why does it not work here? Was I picking the wrong one? No, I don't think so. That's weird. For the meta, if I copy that and then do it again, yeah. I see. Yeah, well, that's an issue. If I redo that, that may or may not actually have any effect on this. That kind of worked. I think the issue that we're having here is that it's not re-invoking the where's the event handler? On-query completions isn't being re-invoked because nothing has changed, so it just keeps the same completions as previous, which works okay for dates because date's always the same. So we need to make that more dynamic so that it just always does the right thing. What's the cleverest way to pull that off? Whenever completions are to be presented to the user, that's a bit of a lie. A list of completion items, a two-element tuple. If completion should be requeried as the user types. I don't know that we necessarily require that. A completion list object. I don't have help for that yet, do I? Oh, I do. A list of completions, some of which may be in the process of being asynchronously fetched. Okay. Optional list of completion values. If none is passed. I wonder if I've never actually used this before. Set the list of completions, allowing the list to be displayed to the user. I think that's different than what we're actually doing here, yeah? The idea behind this is when you summon the autocomplete panel, if you need to talk to something like an external server like LSP does, then it can't immediately display the completions because it doesn't know what they are because it hasn't finished asking yet, but the event wants a result right away. So you create a completion list object and give it that and say, I will tell you when this is done. And then asynchronously behind the scenes, once you gather the appropriate things, you call set completions, throw it in there, and that lets Sublime know that it actually has the stuff to display. That might be a way to make it be more dynamic. I think we're going to see something like this. Wait, we'll do this. On query completions for prefix. Is really all we need for that, I guess. I have have a print that I don't want in here. So I copy the lorem ipsum. I come over to here. I type doc. That has invoked it for that text. And then it expands out. And it's got more crap in it than it needs. I have a feeling something is getting stashed. In a Sublime Text plugin? I don't think so. Generally, that's how dependencies work. Just for the sake of clarity, I'm going to quit that and restart this thing so we can see exactly what it's doing. All right. So I'm going to copy that text into the clipboard. And over here, if we type doc and hit tab, it says it's querying completions right there. And then the one from the snippet inserts us out, and we have that. And then I copy just that text and do copy. When I do doc and hit tab, it says it again, but when I hit it, it still has all of the text in there. I have a bad feeling. Whoops. Oh. Yeah, of course that's obvious. Huh. I know exactly why it's doing that, and it's doing that because I told it to do that, which is kind of ironic as these things go. What's happening here, just to keep everybody into the loop, is that when we refresh the cache, which includes when you save, but also when you trigger the command that this is in, and we make sure that this command triggers when the plugin loads, what it does is look through every single snippet that there is, and for each one, figure out if there's a specific completion that applies to it or not, right? If there's not, it leaves. If there is, it creates these snippet arguments right away, and then it creates a completion item that knows that it needs to pass that as an argument. And since this call here is capturing the current value of all of the variables that we're telling it, they're basically frozen in time. And even though this function for getting this, what this is actually doing here is saying if we're not supposed to do anything with these, leave. Otherwise, gather the list of completions and extend that list with it and return them. This is the point at which the arguments need to be inserted in there, or their values need to be calculated. But I'm not entirely sure what the best way to actually accomplish that is here. Because I'm pretty sure a completion item... can we fiddle a completion item instance? I wonder. I guess there's only one way to find out. X equals sublime dot completion item dot command completion. Don't do that. The trigger is poop. The command is insert. The args are something. And that's really all we need. We've got to spell Sublime correctly, though. Ah, you like the Python too, do you? Pretty much all Python all the time over here. Oh. Sorry. Let's make it an actual dictionary. Now we have a completion item. That's an unfortunate bit of information because we can probably say x dot. Oh. If we said the value was other thing. All right, that'll totally work. So technically speaking, and I'm speaking technically here, I'm a very childish man at times. What this is telling us, and I'm not sure what the best way for us to handle this is that when we create these instances of the completion class, the ones that we're adding into this list, we don't necessarily need to insert the arguments right here, except maybe for the contents. The contents might be a useful thing to have there. This is how I'm thinking about doing this right now. What we need essentially is for this call right here to happen at the point where we return the snippets in the completion handler, not here where we're gathering the list of them. This doesn't make any sense because what we're doing is we're freezing the value, which is entirely the opposite thing of what you need for making something dynamic, you know. Unless you wanted a value that was the last time the plugin reloaded. That seems like a weird edge case. So if we just were to store into this the arguments that actually are the text that was inserted, the problem is we can't easily get it back. But we need to put something into here so that when this part gets called, while we're extending that list with this, what we're actually doing is maybe creating the completions at this point right here. That might be the best way to do that. That way they're always fresh, you know, and always Tim Hortons. So I think that is what we actually want to do here. This is a lot of changes in this thing. This is going to make us unhappy. So in order to do that, we have to say that this is an object that represents a list of snippets. In this dictionary, the keys are scopes. The values of those keys are arrays of completion items that apply to those scopes. Technically true. What we actually want in there is to trigger the description, the content, and well, we don't need the scope, I guess. The thing that we use to actually construct the completion is the stuff that we need to have in there. And we'll add those items in here and then go. So we're definitely going to need trigger. We're going to need the content because we need to actually inject the thing in the first place. Do we need a description here? Yes, because it's part of the annotation. Do we need the scope? No, because we're actually already storing that. So if we decide we need it, we can put it in. So we actually need these three things here: the trigger, the description, and the content. It's time for a good old-fashioned refactoring. By gar, it's been 15 minutes. We normally only stream until about 10 o'clock or so here on YouTube, so I'm not sure if we're going to be able to get this done. I may be forced to just stream a little bit longer over here. In this dictionary, the keys are scopes. The values of those keys are arrays of dicts that have the keys. Hang on. Whoops. A little bit of that. These will dynamically get converted into completion items when they are offered in the AC panel. Yeah. So if that is what we declare we're gonna do with those three values, which I'm gonna just plunk over here into a scratch buffer so that I can remember those for the next 20 seconds. That's still a thing we want. If this all works out, that's not something we want to do here. Do we need the list of enhancers in there as well? I guess, huh? Enhancers. Remember line 97, everybody. So we're not going to want that. We're not going to want that. That part is still something that we actually want. We'll go boom, like so. And we're not going to insert that. We're going to pull that out and put it over there. What we're going to append into this thing is a dictionary with a trigger of trigger and a description of description and a content of what did we do there? And a enhancers of enhancers. As far as I'm aware, there's not a way to do the same thing in Python that you would do in JavaScript where you can short circuit those, because if you just put a single thing in here, it's going to end up being a set, and that's not what we want. So make sure our comments are correct, look up the nodes, pull out the text for everything. We still need to refactor that, but life will be good. Get the list of potential enhancements. If there aren't any, we don't care. Get the list that we're going to insert this into, which is keyed on scope. If you find it, good. If not, add a dictionary, add it in there so the next time through that actually works. And that comment is actually wrong. What this is actually doing is insert a item when the completion fires. Yeah? And that's really all we need for that. Except that maybe I should put a comma on that line. And then it's happy about loading it, so that's fantastically cool. Now we need to do a little bit extra work in the other spot, which is down here. Previously, that is just our log telling us that this is actually triggering. If we do it right now, we can actually see it triggering and then blowing up in the most spectacular way possible, presumably. Or no, because we're actually returning garbage, which is also handy. But every time we're doing that, we can see it querying. That's us invoking this code right here, which first says if we're not supposed to include snippets in the auto completion panel, then we can get bent, because all the thing we're doing here is inserting snippets into the completion panel. If the user doesn't want snippets, they don't want this. Alternately, maybe they do want snippets, and this would be a good way to have just the kind you want, but that's a whole other thing. Here's a list of completions. Previously, we would just extend it like so. So we need to expand these things out. What this actually does, if you're unfamiliar with how this works, this is an iteration over the snippet list stuff. So since that is a dictionary where the keys are scope strings and the values are those arrays of things that we just finished doing something with, this pulls those out and iterates them, and that becomes the scope, and that one becomes the snippets. So you get the key and the value out of there. The all function takes something iterable and returns true or false, depending on whether or not everything in the iteration is true or false. In our particular case, what we're doing is an array comprehension that says for every point in the locations given, which is all of the places in the buffer where there's a cursor added, there could be one, there could be many, check to see if the scope that we got matches. And if every single one of them matches, let's inject this completion. And why would we want to do that? Because if this completion says that it applies in HTML, sorry, if let's say we say that it applies in JavaScript, then if we were inside of just a plain JS file, everywhere is JavaScript, so it doesn't matter. But if you were in an HTML file with embedded JavaScript, then while the cursor is inside of the JavaScript, that's JavaScript, and outside it's HTML or CSS or something, depending on where the cursor is. So in the case where one of the cursors is in the script tag and one of them is in the CSS tag, you don't want to provide a completion that's either CSS or JavaScript, because that's almost certainly not going to be what you want, right? You don't want to look up a JavaScript function name in CSS, plain CSS. And you don't want to insert a CSS property into your JavaScript either. Probably. That's probably a bad example. There's probably a use case for that. Anyway, the idea here is only do it if all of the places where the cursor is going to insert make sense, which is how snippets work in general. Here we're just extending the list of completions with that, but what we actually want is some new thing here, which we might call create completions. And for that, we need to take a input list, and we return back an input list, and say that, whoops, stop it, I'm trying to do that. Given a list of what do we call that? Objects that represent possible completions. Expand them out into full-blown completion items and insert them into a new That is what we want to build here, so that we can say that this is create completions that. This code needs to go in a different place than here. So we'll just sort of boost it up to the top where we're putting all of the rest of our stuff, like so. And what we actually want here is completions is a list and return completions. So now we're in a situation where every time that triggers, we don't actually return anything because we're always getting an empty list, right? But what we need to do here is snag out that code that we had previously, which is for that is going to be a list for an options in input list. Something that we're going to want to do here is this. And just for the sake of getting this actually to do something that we want to say trigger is equal to options.trigger. Sorry, this isn't JavaScript. And well, here actually what we want is we want something like this. Is there a better way to do that? Almost certainly, but we're not going to worry about it right now, because now for each of the items in the input list, create a new completion item and insert it into the completions array. And ironically, this could totally be a comprehension if we did it in a different way. If we boosted this one step up and said, given this thing, create completion, then this could be a this wouldn't actually need to be a function. So that's something that we can look forward to refactoring sometime soon. Here we're going to say completions.append that, which by staggering coincidence is very close to what used to be there. The one with the snippet, and there we go. There is the content of the clipboard as I just had it. Then I copy that text and expand it out again, and now it's the new clipboard text. So we solved that particular problem. How did I add equals options on multiple lines? Oh, that? Here. Like this. I had a string that looks like this off to the right. So if we put a cursor in all of those, we can expand the selection out and copy them. Now there's 4 distinct things that are copied to the clipboard at once. So if you paste, you get all 4 of those particular things. That's how I got them over into this. And then I created multiple cursors, said for each one, copy that text, and then said options and paste. And then indent it. That's how I did that. Basically, the power of multiple cursors cannot be understated in its ability to make your life better. Surely Visual Studio Code does the exact same thing, probably in the exact same way if I had to guess, but I've never actually used it enough to find out one way or the other. In Sublime, pressing Control D expands the selection to the current word. like that. So if there's multiple cursors and multiple words, each one of them expands the selection out to its own situation. And if you copy a distinct number of lines, like I copied those 2 lines, as long as there's always 2 cursors, when you paste, each cursor gets the text that was copied from that cursor, if you will. If there's 2 things copied like this, but there's only 1 cursor, then you just get the whole clipboard. If there's 2, you get 1 per cursor. And if there's 3 or 4 or more, each cursor gets the whole paste. The internal logic on that is that it's what's special is whether or not there's a new line. The easiest way to describe that would be to copy both of those things. So I have 2 things selected. I hit copy, Sublime dot get clipboard, returns the text trigger and a new line and then description, but not a new line. So what it's doing behind the scenes is taking this, splitting it on new lines to get some number of things. And if there's exactly as many cursors as there are things in that list, each cursor gets 1. That's why you have to be careful about stuff like having, I don't know what a good way to actually describe this is. One there and let's say that. I hit copy. There's a new line here, but there's also a new line here. And it puts a new line on the end. So when we do this, there's 2 new lines in here now. So when it splits this, it gets 3 things. So if there was 1 cursor, it would get the whole thing. You think there's 2, it's going to get them both. It doesn't. For that one, there has to be 3 cursors. And then it works the way you want. It's a funky thing to explain. It's the easiest way I've found to learn how that works is to just play with it, and then it becomes very obvious what it's actually doing behind the scenes. But I think that is us having extended this in a fantastical way. So yeah, it's and I'll tell you this, I never really used this as a feature until I started using Sublime Text, but it was actually introduced to me in IntelliJ IDEA, I think it was. They had like a new feature announcement that said, hey, check it out, we have multiple cursors now. Isn't that cool? And I went, I guess. But they never actually, described in any certain terms how a person might actually use that to enhance their workflow. So I just sort of avoided it. And it's sort of like a first-class thing in Sublime. I don't know that I want to take the time to commit this because it is time for the stream to be done. But we have actually gotten a fair bit of magic in here. As a matter of fact, yeah, I just always want to go a little bit more. But basically what we have now, after just a couple of hours, we've only been live for 2 hours and 7 minutes here, we refactored the code. It's longer now than it was before by probably a fair amount, I would imagine, if we actually look at all of the stuff that's added in here that wasn't there before. But the expense of doing that is that this code up here is now smaller, tighter, and more easily extendable. So instead of hard coding a thing, we actually have it being much more advanced than that, which is quite cool. This is probably going to cause us problems in the future, but we're not going to worry about that for right now. PyCharm. PyCharm is not one of their tools that I actually used, I don't think. I never really used Python for anything at all until I started using Sublime Text. I think I've mentioned this in other streams before. I saw Python. I played with it a bit. I went, it's okay. I don't know that I'd ever want to use it for anything. And then I started using Sublime, and I'm like, I want to make myself a little plugin. What's that? Python. And I started using it because I wanted to create plugins and packages for Sublime, just like we're doing here right now. And that sort of set me on the track to spend the next 5 of the next 7 years doing no hobby coding whatsoever, except in Python, in Sublime text type stuff. It's actually kind of interesting. But all that said, it is time for us to bid adieu. Thanks everybody who hung out, and thanks again to Stephen Lien for becoming a Stephen Lien, pardon me, for being a Sublime text fanatic. Thanks for becoming a member. That is super awesome. Thank you so much. Shout out to Stephen Lien. I hope I'm pronouncing that right as well, by the way. We're going to be back next Monday working on this a little bit more. If I have the time, I am going to commit this up in between streams, and we'll continue from here. If not, that'll be the first thing that we do in the next stream, is actually commit these things in, because we need to change the name of it. It was initially enabled date extended snippets. It needs to be something different now. It needs to be like just extended snippets or enhanced snippets or something. And we still have some other things on our to-do list. I'm pointing at the Git like you can see what it is, but I already switched away. But in any case, that is what we're going to be doing in the next stream. So happy to support you. I've learned so much and look forward to future. Oh, well, thank you so much. I have been working quite a bit on that sort of thing. It's fun to get back into the whole scheme of things. It's been a while since I've done anything, and I keep coming up with new ideas for videos as well. For example, that thing that I mentioned earlier in the stream about how previously if you wanted to execute multiple commands, you needed to use the chain of command or multi-command packages. That's actually just built in now. That's like a short little video on its own reminding people of that particular kind of functionality. Thank you so much. For those that are in the know, I also stream on Twitch as well. Same time zone. There should be a link down below. I do development there as well. Only there we're doing JavaScript type stuff instead. Still using Sublime Text. You can still ask questions there and learn things like cursor wizardry and all of that great stuff. So if you like that sort of thing, you have a Twitch account, I'd love to see you there as well. I think that's going to do it for here. One last mention, the live stream goes unlisted when it's done, but there is a playlist named Off the Clock where you can find this replay, which should appear very shortly after everything is said and done. Thank you, Nightbot, for pointing that out. Thanks, Tech Ignition, and Stephen Lien. Thanks again for your support here on the channel. Thanks to everybody who watched us this evening. We'll see ya in the next stream, and until then, everybody, please have a sublime week. Have a good night, everybody.